Welcome everyone to the XchangeCore webinar where we're going to be talking about the open source release of XchangeCore. So thanks everybody around the country for joining. And what we're going to do is take a look at first sort of a level setting on XchangeCore, since we've gotten a lot of inquiries over the last couple of days about what this thing is that people are now looking at. And then we'll talk about where it came from, some of the new functionalities that are in the open source release, focusing specifically on the intra-core sharing rules and the new management console. Then for those of you who have been with XchangeCore for a while, what that means to the compatibility to version 3.3 right now for most of you. And then we'll talk about where to get that open source code on GitHub. And then finally talk about where you get the executable, because certain groups are eligible to be able to get the executable code, and everyone can get the source code. And then, of course, we'll have our open mic session where anybody can talk about anything. So let's get started. Answering the first question, what the heck does this thing do for me? Well, for those of you who are new, and for those of you who have been around for a while, this might even be a slightly different perspective on it. Because we want to start out very basically, it's software. It's web service software that can operate for a city or an agency or a county or a company. That's one place to put it and one way to use it. It can also be an entire statewide network, and XchangeCore serving the entire state. It can also be a regional network, and I think this is going to be the most popular way that we see things unfold. Regional networks supported by organizations. There are private hosted clouds. A company or an organization can host a cloud implementation for its entire infrastructure. And then finally, there are cloud hosted subscriptions. Companies are hosting XchangeCore, and you can be located anywhere, and it becomes a national or even a global implementation of XchangeCore. So software that serves this range of needs, and literally you can put it any place from the computer on your desk up to the cloud. It has the purpose of exchanging incident information among all these different groups, federal, state, local, private sector, and exchanging that information from the field up to emergency operations centers and back down again. XchangeCore as well enables any application that's desired by end users to do that incident information exchange. Not saying go out and buy this, not saying here's the thing that you should use, and if you use this then you can share information. This says anybody can connect to XchangeCore with any application, all of which are secure. And that's a key element of it, is that you connect to applications that approve the exchange of information. And it's a two-way exchange of information. So XchangeCore takes that essential information, whether it's assets or inventory or business disruption or field observation, documents or sensors, geospatial, non-geospatial, anything related to incident management can pass through XchangeCore. And when it does, that two-way passing through XchangeCore, it is synchronized, notified, and turned into content packages. And a content package is built around an incident like this fire. That content package takes that information from all those different applications, joins it together, associates it, and turns it into common operational data. Common operational data being national standard data, so that when it comes out the other side, receiving applications know what to do with it. That all allows us collectively to orchestrate a central element throughout the entire disaster decision lifecycle. We start up in the upper left-hand corner with those data sources, of which there can be any. You now know that all those different applications can deliver data in there. XchangeCore translates that data and transforms it into common operational data, which then gets composed into content packages, meaning I have an incident, and these are all the different sources of information that are associated with that incident. So there's only one place to look. There are agreements that determine who gets to consume that information. Those who are approved to consume get notified every time something new changes in that common operational data. And those applications down the bottom left-hand side are now enabled to process, visualize, and improve the data. And when they improve the data, it then gets put back into the cycle. Because I do something on my application, I want others to know about it. So that data is then exposed in its native format, becoming a data source that then gets translated and transformed back into common operational data. So the next organization is able to bring that data to bear on their decisions throughout the entire life cycle of that incident. That's what XchangeCore does for you in essence. So now that we all have an understanding of what it is, let's see where it came from. XchangeCore has a proven history. It started out in 2006 with the Department of Homeland Security to design something that was then called UCITS. A couple of years took place to build a reference implementation to actually create the software. A couple of years of pilots leading up to the Department of Homeland Security certification and accreditation of this software to operate on DHS secure networks. Towards the end of that, Northern Command said, gee, how do we do interoperability? They requested UCITS for evaluation, evaluated it, and during a 2-year period built on UCITS something called the Matador program, which was the Mission Assurance and Task something assessment and disaster relief and recovery. Took UCITS and built that. So that was the first taking of the code out of DHS and sharing it out with the Department of Defense. Throughout that period, when the Department of Defense had it, UCITS was graduating from the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Division, given transition funding to go out and form a nonprofit XchangeCore community, which is what's been done over the last couple of years and what you're participating in right now. At the same time, on the DoD side, the software that is known as Keystone in DoD got its DIACAP release, which allows it to be operated on a .mil network. And over the last year, a project with the European Command was done. So now Northern Command, European Command, and improvements were made to the software that are then passed back, that item number 2 there, to the XchangeCore community. Which brings us today, where we have our XchangeCore Open Source release available for civilian networks, the Keystone Core and Connectors release, which is available for .mil networks. But they have a common code base. That information is the same. And that common code base allows all of us to be able to, we foresee, bridge that civilian-military network barrier in the future. But most importantly, what it has done is provided back on both sides, military and civilian side, a rich body of new capabilities into what on the civilian side is called XchangeCore, and on the .mil side is called Keystone. So let's take a look at what's in the open source release. First of all, 3 major components of functionality. Technical, some really down in the guts, and we're only going to use one slide on it because it's so far down in the guts. Core-to-core communication reliability. Secondly, and this is so important for the operational side, what are called intra-core sharing agreements. What I refer to that is our virtual cores. On a single physical core that you would install in any of those places that we saw before, from my desktop all the way up to the cloud, I can now support many virtual cores, which, as you'll see, enormously reduces the cost of operation and expands the ability to connect to many, many, many more organizations. And the third piece, usability, we'll take a quick look through the redesigned management console. which end users will never see, because you see that earlier you saw all those different applications. Any of those could connect into XchangeCore, and that's all you would ever do. But the management console is used by the administrative team. So we'll take a quick roll through that because it helps to explain some of the new capabilities in the intra-core sharing. So let's start off with core-to-core communications. Only going to reference this in one slide. What it did was create redundancy and handshaking down at the bit level as it's moving across the networks to make certain that exchanges are completed in the core-to-core sharing, because as asynchronous communications, things have the potential for getting lost, and now they have to get confirmed and reinforced once that information is either received or not received on either end. So that handshaking, very important component, but nothing you really need to worry about. Second part, the intra-core agreements are very important though. So I said that allows one XchangeCore to serve a larger audience. It's really introduced the concept of a regional core or a multi-jurisdictional core. What it does is allow information sharing agreements based on groupings within a core. It does that by having, for each application that connects into XchangeCore, it creates a relationship of a local core, which is the from core, and a remote core, which will be the to core. And those can be defined now, instead of as physical devices as they used to be. You can now define those still as physical devices, but you can define it as a specific user or application ID, a group of those users or application IDs, or a combination of those groups and user application IDs, and that combination extends to cores. So as we'll see shortly, the way it used to look and currently does, and those of you who are using 1.3.3, you've got an XchangeCore in the center, you've got applications connected to it. Those cores connect to each other in core-to-core sharing. What we have now, though, is the ability to create these virtual groups that are highlighted there in the green triangles. Those virtual groups now have the ability to have their own exchange agreements. So, first one, this is the same as on version 1.3.3. Anyone in a core can exchange with anybody else. You can write that rule. The second rule is, you know what? I now have two different jurisdictions. They have virtually nothing in common on a day-to-day basis. Only exchanges that are going to take place will be allowed within these groups. So only the triangle on the right and the triangle on the left, and those applications connected there, will exchange among each other. People outside can't get to them. People outside can exchange with each other, but the people outside can't get their information. And in this environment, the people inside the triangles keep their information present. So think of a public safety agency that wants to have the security of knowing that the Department of the Environment doesn't get dispatch information about specialized cases or something. All that can now be secured within a virtual environment without having to have two physical devices, two computers. Now this can all happen on the same computer and complete security between them. Rule 3 then says, okay, now I've just got some applications that I want to write a rule. So without regard for that, I want the one in the upper left and the one down in the lower right, I want you two guys to be able to share with each other. So those applications can now share information. Those applications, when you write the rule, allow you to say, okay, I'm inside this group on the right, my triangle on the right, but I want to allow this single application there to share data with that application that's on the outside of this group. So in this case, it might be a fire department, and I'm keeping everything together on my inside my triangle there because it's my jurisdiction, but I want to do mutual aid between fire departments in another jurisdiction. So I'd allow my fire department CAD information to use XchangeCore to push information to another fire department CAD. That would be an example of an application exchange. And rule number 4 says, hey, combine it all. I can have my groups working in isolation, as you see on the left-hand side. I can have a group working separately on the right-hand side, but I can have one of those applications sharing with somebody on the outside, and I can have 2 individual applications that are not related to any group that are sharing through XchangeCore. I think you can see, particularly those of you who have been doing this for a while, can see the enormous versatility that we've now established and the ability to say, you know what, those 2 triangles represent, each one of them represents 5 counties, and those applications represent a state common operating picture. So we're now going to share my 5 county information that is restricted on a daily basis, but under certain rules, I'm going to share it up to my state common operating picture. Lots and lots of versatility that has now been designed into it. So huge, huge improvement. When you do that deployment, before in XchangeCore 1.3.3 and previous versions, you had, like we say on the left-hand side, a single XchangeCore and its ability to share those applications. And then in the core-to-core sharing, that core could go out to all those other instances out there and share information, which meant that everybody on the left-hand side was sharing with any one of those groups on the right-hand side, but everybody was exposed to that information. Well, now you can combine that versatile virtual core sharing that we just talked about into being able to do that both with single core deployments as well as with the virtual core deployments. So stay with me on this. 2 single cores. These are the brand new open source version. They're going to share with each other just the way they always have. But now I can plug in another core, and that core inside of it has virtual cores. There are a couple military bases there. There are other sources that are having of information. So these people are all sharing inside of that core. The single core out on the left-hand side, any one of those applications can then say, hey, I'm now going to share over there with that core. Or that whole group, the triangle, can say, hey, everything we do is now going to be shared with that core. And you're going to now be able to see that core-to-core sharing with all that rich intra-core sharing, be able to build some wonderful, wonderful combinations of information exchange to satisfy needs of multiple organizations in a wide area, certainly a statewide area, and I think we're going to see regional cores being established in the very near future. And that single core also, that virtual core, can then go to all those other virtual cores, all of whom are talking to each other. So that tremendous ability to share that information. Two-way flow, simultaneous exchange, synchronization, and being able to notify, no matter where that exists, that something has changed over here all the way in this bottom right-hand corner, and it's being shared out over the cloud back to this organization, and that application then says, oh, I see that's just changed. Let's update my information because XchangeCore says there's new things on it. This is basically what I said in a nice little structured format. If you look at that matrix up there, look at the upper left-hand corner, the green one, that was core-to-core sharing. That's the way we had it before. Now, with the new open source version, the full set of interactions between users and applications and organizations and cores all now exist and are available and are provided through 3 different parts. And this is very important for those of you who've dived down a little bit more. Notification service, all these interactions. So a notification will go from, if a change is made in that user all the way in the bottom right-hand corner, and they have an agreement with that organization up in the upper left-hand side, a specific notification only between those 2 X's are going to take place. Everybody else won't get notified because notifications follow these agreements. All the client services, the task services, the sensor service, the resource service, all those other services that you use to carry out the exchange of all that quality information, those all follow these rules now. And the feeds, those of you who have used the GORSS and the KML feeds to push information easily out to ArcGIS Online or out to Google Earth or to read it in a viewer, those all work too. So you need to have the authorization to match the rule in order to get the feed now. So all of that is part of the extensions and added security, really, to the new core-to-core interactions and the core-to-client interactions. What that looks like, only one or two of you are probably going to do this, the system administrators, but agreements basically have a group ID now, so that's going to be an agreement from a core at my core to your ISP, and it's going to be for the group one. And then if you look in the middle, I can say, okay, now it's group one and it's an ID. So my group, that one in the middle says my group is going to share to those two specific applications. So not something we want to spend any time on, but very easy to sit down and draw a little chart and say, I want this one to share to this one. This is group number one. This is application two. I'm simply going to write this little tiny line there when you get into the administrative console, which is what we're going to take a look at next. This new management console has a couple of features associated. One, it's all written in JavaScript, which means that it is inherent in the way web browsers work today, which also means there's a great body of new example code about JavaScript connection to XchangeCore that's becoming available, because everything in the management console will eventually become part of the example code. So if you want to do something using JavaScript, there's lots of new resources associated with connecting into the core using JavaScript. And the rest of it is just little features. So let's take a look at it here. New layout looks, web-like. Has its little drop-down menus and tabs and all that. Several bars. You got a menu bar and an action bar. You group all the items together, and then you've got your details and the things that you can do with them. We take a look at some of these things. Off of that menu up in the right-hand corner, I can look at my core status, incidents of work products. I can do sharing agreements. I can build my users and groups right here, and I can develop resource instances and profiles that allow applications to connect into the core. So some of the things that you used to have to do down at the level of Tomcat, for those of you who have gone through this, all now up here in the administrative console. So again, enormously easier, faster to implement. So core status, click on that menu item and you see the core, your core. You see the cores that you're connected to. So I got a regional core and I got the other core. I can know the status of my own core and other cores as well. I then can look and see what's active and inactive on the core at that moment, looking at individual work products. The sort of base, easy one to look at is there's a tab for incidents there that you'll see over here. There's a tab for alerts over there, and then you can pick any of the other work products by selecting there. When you click on that incident, it's going to show you the list of the incidents that are currently in place. Click on one of those and you get to see the details of it. This has the same kind of information that you saw before in the older administrative console, but basically this is taking a peek into that work product. But then you can take a peek in a couple of different ways. Now, when you click on that, you can see it in an XML format. Well, now we've also added JSON format so that you can see the content of that incident work product in a JSON format. You also perform the common features, and again, these are all administrative features. No end user would ever touch this. But I can close selected incidents, so if we finished up an exercise and everybody says, all right, let's shut it down, somebody can go in and just say, boom, we've cleaned everything off of XchangeCore. And the close and archive function exists here as well. Mentioned the ability to create new users and create groups. That's a great function compared to having to go into OpenDJ or your LDAP to be able to do that. And it's done very simply. You're going to create the group. You got a group name, tells you when it was created. One of the new things that it's going to ask you for is a latitude and longitude for the group. Might be the latitude and longitude of where the core is, but a virtual core could be located in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm operating physical core could be in Memphis. My virtual core is in Columbia, South Carolina. So what I want to do is put the latitude and longitude of where my group is going to be centered. So it's a city or it's the center of a state or whatever. And we'll talk about what that's for later on. But you now have the option of telling the core where you care about. And that's really the purpose of this. You then also can create the resource profiles and instances, as we mentioned before. And again, this is down in the guts that actually authorizes an application to be able to move data back and forth through XchangeCore. And then this is where you build the agreements. The agreements between cores or between, as you now know, applications or between users. It's all described down here. So down here, I'm going to name a core. I've got my, first of all, my agreement sitting up there at the top. And I've got my agreements, and I'm going to write rules that are associated with that. So I'm going to have this core is my from core. I'm going to share it with this other core. I'm calling it to region 7 or something like that. And I'm going to update that. I can then enable specific sharing agreements. Without this enabling of sharing agreements, it's going to share everything between these two organizations. But I can now begin to write specific sharing agreements. So that sharing agreement, we're going to take the first one, and what it does is allow you to select anything from an incident type to share. You can extend some extended metadata that we'll describe in a minute, or proximity. Let's take a look first at proximity. Proximity, if you add that rule, you're going to be asked for a distance that you want to exchange information with that other core. So a core says I'm here, and this rule says if anything happens within, in this case, 10 kilometers or 1,000 kilometers of this core, I want to know about it. What this is doing is allowing us to create those regional cores where somebody says, great, I'm now covering all of FEMA Region 1 up in the Northeast United States, and you know what? Massachusetts isn't caring a whole lot about Maine for some reason. So I don't want to know and be notified of incidents that are occurring outside of this area, which is Massachusetts and its rough boundaries. So that's what a proximity rule is allowing us to do, is to share the location of an incident if it's within a defined boundary of the remote core. So I don't push it out to you unless you've said, hey, this is where I want to get, where I am and where I want to get information. The second category is extended metadata, and this uses all of the common alerting protocol levels of certainty, I guess I would call it. They refer to it as extended metadata. So you can have these new terms that are in there. So you can now have, think of it as a status or a urgency level for the incident sharing. So don't give it to me unless there's a cap standard of urgency associated with it. I'll take everything of a certain type, but don't give it to me unless you have absolute certainty that it's there. So that extended data metadata allows one more way to write these rules to make certain you're getting the information that you want. And then finally, incident type, that's been there all along. Any type of incident that you want to establish in there, you can build that rule and thus have a combination of all of those different components of the extended metadata, of the incident type, and of the proximity. There's a basic set of inside the core sharing. As we've seen in previous presentations, you can further restrict or enhance that information in your connectors to that, but that becomes a basic form of in-core sharing. Okay, so now having said all that, XchangeCore Open Source is new. So there are two important components to compatibility. The first one is everything that every company or every government agency has written in writing a connector to XchangeCore is backward compatible. Those 1.3.3 connectors you have, they work with 2.0. No problem there. Where it is not backward compatible is between the cores, and core-to-core sharing. So if you have 3 jurisdictions that are working together, you should not upgrade one of them to the 2.0 core, because it's not going to work on core-to-core sharing with the others. If you have the 3 of them and you're all using Google Earth, that connection to Google Earth or to your dispatch system, that's going to continue to work with 2.0. But it's that core-to-core sharing that won't work, because we did all sorts of those things that I told you in the guts on the handshaking and the core-to-core reliability. Those require different logic to exist in connecting core-to-core. Not a big deal, because let me take you back to the earlier thing about virtual cores. If I have 3 jurisdictions that each have their own core, and somebody says, gee, I want to replace that and move up to 2.0, the open source core, what I personally would do would be end up having those 3 jurisdictions each use one physical core and have their own private virtual core on it. It's going to cut the cost down by 1/3, the level of effort down by 1/3, and this is a secret. It might improve cooperation among those jurisdictions, something that we see as a side benefit of XchangeCore. So, compatible with all the software connections that have been written, but on core-to-core you need to have, if you have core-to-core exchanges going on, you need to make those upgrades all at the same time. Requirements, though, are something that make it easy, because the requirement for 2.0 is really not any different than the requirement for 1.0. So the open source, you can stick it on the same hardware and should not have any problems. The only major difference is that you will be using a free copy, unless you have an enterprise copy, but a free copy of Microsoft SQL Server, which is the database that is being used now rather than the open source database. So those couple of things, little technical issues, we've seen the old XchangeCore and the new XchangeCore get plopped onto exactly the same computer without any issues whatsoever. So now that I've excited you, where do you get it? The open source part, it's there. It's open. It's up on GitHub, or it's being put up on GitHub as we speak. And there's now an XchangeCore component on GitHub with, you see a whole set of different services there for emergency management and the infrastructure services and all the rest of those. That's all. But remember, this is source code. So if you're a programmer, this is where you're going. If you're an emergency manager, or you're a fire guy, or you're a police guy, you're never going to go look at this stuff, because it's going to be done for you. But for those of you who are engaged in deep dive projects in information exchange, you can now get the code for this. Companies who have been coming to us saying, gee, if it did this, it would be great, you can now go in and make those changes and then offer them back to the community as an improvement to XchangeCore. That will then be vetted and evaluated, always available as open source, but it won't be part of the executable version. And we'll get to that in a second. Or what's my value proposition with the XchangeCore community at that point? I can get my XchangeCore source code all by myself. Well, I also want to get a little support. And what we have is in the spin-off, the graduation from the Department of Homeland Security into the XchangeCore community, is there's support provided. And we can provide up to 10 hours of technical support, and you'll find that's way more than enough for an XchangeCore project. So if you go onto GitHub and grab the software, I suggest you also come in XchangeCore.org and register your project. That way we'll know who you are. You'll be able to get access to that technical assistance, and we can help you through things. For the rest of you who aren't application programmers, you can get an executable version of it in two different ways, or two different types. One of them is the XchangeCore software is provided without cost to responder organizations under the arrangement with the Department of Homeland Security. So you go on to XchangeCore.org, fill out the register to get the software, and say, I want to have the newest XchangeCore software, and we'll provide you access to download that. That's for responder organizations. If you are a developer, you may have a single non-production XchangeCore instance to be used only for development and testing. You do the same thing, you do the same registration, you agree that this is not a production version, and we'll then give you the ability to download the newest open source executable version of the software. So two different channels there. Developers that can use it inside, responder organizations can use it in any way that you see fit. That's taking you through why you ought to be using this newest version of XchangeCore, where you can get it, the benefits of it, and the new capabilities, and how we can support that. So with that, the microphone is open for questions, either about what I've just said or anything about anything, as all of you know. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I have a question. Did anybody deploy the executable software like Amazon Web Services?
Oh, yes. Yep, it's up on Amazon, it's up on Google, we've had it on Rackspace, and have had it on private cloud. So absolutely, inherent there in both, and for that you can use either the Windows version or the Linux version.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else from anybody? All right, it's a lot to digest. Let me summarize it this way. Everything you knew about XchangeCore before is even better, easier to implement, lower cost, and provides a wider span of connections available for you to solve those interoperability problems. With that, I'll wish you all an excellent... Yes, oh, please.
The JDLS, I believe, was the acronym. What was that?
I'm not... Oh, JSON, JSON. Yeah, that's a different format used increasingly in web software, and you can translate between XML and JSON, and think of it just as a more compact format than the XML format.
And who's supporting that? I mean, is it from a particular vendor or somebody?
No, it's an international standard. It's very many different forms of software used as their internal storage, this JSON format. As an Exchange format, you're still going to find XML being more common from computer to computer. But the JSON format, really its advantages, it's much more compact and maybe even a little bit more readable to a human being for that.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Jim, this is Dan Starr.
Yes, Dan.
Do you want me to work through you or through the other programmer on the issue we were having at Clark County?
Yeah, for right now, how about if we get on a quick email exchange and we'll set up a call with the team. And here you see the exact technical support that I was talking about. Dan Stars from Clark County, Las Vegas area. And they're in the process of connecting their web UC to an XchangeCore. and we're going to help them through the last couple of stages of figuring out what's happening in WebEUC. So, okay, thanks. Any other questions? Excellent. Thanks for your attention. Fill out the forms, come and see us, and we'll all exchange information. Bye, everybody.